Welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to be looking at the secret to protecting peak. Peak, I think this year is going to be more challenged than ever. Well, the whole year's been a challenge, but throwing the busiest time of year on top of that, I think is going to be a real challenge. So we're going to look at some of the tactics and strategies you can use to make your peak go as smoothly as possible. Now, I'm thrilled today to be joined by two people. Patrick Gore from hampers.com. If you don't know hampers.com, I highly recommend that you go and have a look at their site. Whether you're ordering a hamper for yourself or as Christmas presents, you'll find an awful lot of very, very nice gifts there. And also joined by Bobby from GFS. So would you like to introduce yourself, please? Patrick, welcome to our webinar today.
Chris, thank you very much indeed, especially for that great introduction. I'm Patrick Gore. I'm the Managing Director and owner of hampers.com, and we're a gifting company that tries to bring joy and wholehearted togetherness to gifting. We sell and we service both corporates and private individuals with food and wine gifts throughout the whole year.
And Bobby, welcome back to Tame Bay.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, Patrick. I'm Bobby Tulis. I'm the Group Marketing Director for Global Freight Solutions. Some of you may know us as GFS. We are the largest provider of managed multi-carrier services in the industry.
Great. So let's just jump in and look at what's going on. We had Brexit, that was a year ago, but frankly, Brexit is still impacting us. And then we had COVID, and that's also been going on for over a year now, and that's also having an impact. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing is what everyone's been talking about, the lorry driver shortage. We saw the so-called petrol crisis when people got scared and went to fill their cars up. But I think it's a real challenge because the reality is we have lost an awful lot of European workforce that either left before Brexit or left because of COVID and simply haven't returned. And of course, coupled with that, everyone's gone online shopping instead of going to the shops for many, many months over the last year or so, which has made logistics even more difficult. But I think the logistics problems go back even before we worry about UK delivery. I mean, Felixstowe Port and Liverpool Port are absolutely rammed with containers, which just aren't going anywhere. And Felixstowe actually stopped taking empty containers to ship back to China to be refilled because they just ran out of space. So I think there's an awful lot going on. Patrick, Bobby, what do you two see as the biggest threats and issues for delivery to customers over peak? Is it getting the stock in, or is it getting the stock out to the customers?
I would say that there is no particular point. There are issues across the whole length of the supply chain. I think it's really interesting and ironic that we're now seeing power cuts in China. It just goes to show how cyclical the supply chain is. It all started, the supply chain, in troubles that we are seeing now, all started when China went into lockdown and China, the factory of the world, shut down, which caused, backlogs of the factories shut down, manufacturing supply was, there was a real pinch there. And now post lockdown, they're trying to ramp up production, and consequently, it's taking up a lot of electricity. Coal prices have gone up because, of course, a lot of the factories run on coal, and we're still feeling the pinch points at the top end of the supply chain with supply. Then you come look at distribution, and we're seeing log jams in Felixstowe. We're seeing shortage of lorry drivers, so distribution is hurting as well. It's just one thing after the other. It's pinch points all across the supply chain. But what's great is that it all evolves around what the customer is doing. So depending on whether consumers are going to start shopping now, then we may see things flatten out. We won't have such, peaky sort of peak. But if they leave it all to the last minute, then we are going to have huge problems.
And Patrick, how has it been impacting your business over the past year?
Yeah, pretty similar to Bobby in terms of many of the answers that she gave. There's little things. We in our hampers we use estate bottled wines that we source from around the world, and we exclusively source them from vineyards around the world. We have a great relationship with our Argentinian supplier, Gauchesco, and an example of supply chain for them was there's no ink in Argentina, so we had to make sure that we ordered our wine early enough to be able to be bottled with labels, which meant they could legally come into the UK, or we just wouldn't have got them. They wouldn't have been able to print the labels to get the wine to get it onto a carrier, and then it got stuck in snow in the Andes. And then it got stuck at the port, and then it got stuck at the port coming over here as well. So it was 3 to 4 months of additional hassle. I think in terms of a lot of the lorry drivers and supply chain issues that they've already been well documented, Chris. I think there's a couple of other things I'd just throw in. I think there's a chance of us sort of doom scrolling ourselves down into a negative spiral of the fact that there's just bad news everywhere, and that people just have to realize that there's some really good professionals involved in the supply chain who are very, very good at problem solving, and they are very, very good at coming up with solutions. So it's not all bad news, and we've got to keep it proportionate. For me, the other things that I think are still out there, I'm looking out at weather for October out of the window, which is more akin to probably late August or September. So there's always those sort of normal things that can be thrown up as well. And as you said, we've still got that dreadful lurking shadow of COVID in the background, still to come.
The other thing I would add to that, Patrick, and thank you very much, because we also need to look at just how much we've survived already. This is now the second peak with COVID hanging over us, and last peak was, I think carriers, the whole industry pulled together, and it was one of the best peaks, at least in terms of carrier performance, delivery performance. We managed to protect delivery by the industry working together, retailers, carriers, businesses like GFS. So I'm sure that we've got a lot of learnings from last peak that are going to put us in good stead for this peak as well.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. So Patrick, I want to dig a little bit into your business. So how important is peak for hampers.com? I don't know, is it 50% of your business, 60%? Is it more of your business? And when you look at all the media headlines about the driver shortages and potential strikes, what would you consider your worst logistics nightmare to be? What's the absolute worst that can happen?
Okay, well, firstly, you've obviously been looking at my notes, Chris, because peak to us is, in one word, critical. That's because we have 50% of our dispatches and 60% of our sales occur during the month of December. People treat one another to a little bit more at Christmas, so the average order value of our products goes up a bit towards Christmas, and so that's why there's the difference between 50% of dispatches and 60% of sales value. But if we didn't have Christmas at that level, you can tell that it would pretty much wipe out a lot of the gifting industry, and certainly an awful lot of the hamper industry, which has traditionally thrived at Christmas. We work both offline, meaning we have customers that contact us via email, phone, etc., and we work with them to provide an offline solution, as well as the website that you see in front of you. And about 80% of our trade is online. So we actually see both elements. And just very briefly, I'm sure everyone gets this, but if Bobby and I use slightly different terminology, I tend to say that customers are the people who pay for their gifts and consumers are the people who receive. Because for me, I've got to make sure that I look after both customers and consumers. I've got double bubble every single time there's a transaction. So I'll have a slightly different terminology coming from the gifting industry to Bobby. In terms of my worst nightmare, subject to this year, Chris, I think I've already had it back a few years ago when we were unfortunate enough to have a key reliance on one large carrier. And this is before we joined forces with GFS in our partnership we have with them. And what we found over time, coming into peak and then getting into peak, was that we had some rumors in the marketplace that a certain carrier was really going to start to struggle, and they were private equity backed, and so there was no visibility on what was really happening. We then heard of other people starting to look to other carriers to move to them, and then it started that the deliveries just weren't happening. We were getting the stuff out of the door, but then it was, oh no, sorry, that didn't happen, that didn't happen. Then the carrier didn't start to turn up here. So all of a sudden we were getting into peak and we were seeing that those items that we had dispatched weren't actually getting through to the consumers. And then we were developing a backlog which started to fill up our goods out department where we dispatched from. And we just couldn't label. We couldn't get ready for the next day because the carrier hadn't turned up. And we couldn't get any answer whatsoever as to what was actually happening. And what turned out was, a few days before Christmas, amazingly, once they'd taken virtually the majority of people's cash, they then went into administration and eventually disappeared. And I think there was some very greedy and ruthless people behind that situation that led to an awful lot of people having a disappointed Christmas and left small companies like ours to pick up the pieces as a result of that sort of decimation that they caused. As you can probably tell, I am still a little bit bitter about it, but we were very fortunate in that our team worked very hard over Christmas and New Year, refunded a lot of people and looked after them. But when you're so reliant to provide a service alongside a product that you've worked so hard to develop, and then they let you down, it's decimating. And what it also does is it also shows up those weakest links within your business very, very rapidly. And when you're in peak, there is no way you can go back and repair those weak links when you're in the thick of a peak. So that's what I've lived through, and that's my sort of experience so far. I haven't got a sort of doomsday scenario which suggests that something worse could happen this year. So I'm going to just stick with that.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I think it's really interesting because obviously 2019 CityLink went bust at Christmas and, as you say, just disappeared off the face of the earth. But even this year, we saw a slight problem with FedEx and TNT, where they just on the day informed their customers, we won't be collecting today. And they said it could be up to 72 hours, but actually they managed to get back online the following day. But by then, people, like you said, they'd got all of the orders backed up that hadn't been collected with FedEx or TNT labels. They then had to get another carrier in, relabel everything to get it out of the door. By the time they knew that they were going to get their regular collection the second day, they'd already labeled everything for alternative carriers or made other arrangements. And it is an absolute nightmare if you can't switch at the drop of a hat. So, Bobby, you're kind of the industry's largest provider of multi-carrier services. So what do you at GFS typically see as kind of the most common delivery mistakes that retailers make?
Right. Okay. So first of all, I'm still shaking after the story that Patrick just told us. I don't think anything can top that. And I hope to to goodness that you would never experience anything, that nobody on this call has experienced anything as bad as that. However, there are some common mistakes that we see, and I don't want to say mistakes, because sometimes it's really down to the retailers, not that they don't understand that they need to do this. Sometimes they have constraints within their business that are unable to address certain weak points. And like Patrick said, once you're in the thick of peak, it's too late to sort of reverse out of situations and recover if something goes wrong, if you haven't identified those weak points up front. So we've done some research and pulled together what we see as probably the top 5 mistakes or pitfalls that we see a lot of retailers falling into over peak. And it'd be good to get your perspective on this as well, Patrick. So, and some of it you've already mentioned. So obviously we're on the right streak here. So let's have a look at the first one. Thinking delivery options don't matter. There is definitely a temptation to keep things simple over peak and think, okay, we don't want to be adding extra delivery options. We just want to be able to, manage the delivery options that we have without adding more on our plate. But, for as far as your customers or consumers are concerned, delivery or lack of delivery, convenient delivery options is the second highest reason for cart abandonment rates. So the first mistake, I think, is around retailers not offering customers a broad enough range of delivery options, whether that's next day, nominated hour, click and collect, all the different options. The mistake of not offering them broad enough range of delivery options so that they can find one that's convenient for them, right? Because if there aren't any convenient options, guess what? You're going to lose the sale. So I would say, look at the delivery options that you're offering, make sure that they are as broad as they can be. Patrick, I don't know what your viewpoint is on that.
Thanks, Bobby. Interesting that this point, it's number one here, and I think it's probably number one for the whole presentation. The bottom line is, as well as retailing a product, our whole business depends on service and service delivery. And alongside a very high quality product, we want to always deliver a high quality service. And no matter how good we are at being able to do our market research on our suppliers and be able to do the packing correctly and care for what we put together, if that delivery through to the consumer is not at a level that the customer is expecting, then we can forget it. If we talk about non-peak just for one moment, in the gifting industry, we're very, very, very used to having to make sure that the window that you have for the delivery of the product is hit, because it's a birthday, it's an anniversary, etc. So that correct day delivery of that service is really, really important. And anniversaries, birthdays, 7 days a week. So you have to have those options if you come from the gifting industry, because if you miss that little window of time, the gift loses its meaning, and the customer has not got what they've paid for.
Yeah.
I think we're a little bit more fortunate at Christmas, because Christmas is a period of giving. And where you have that period, it allows us a little bit more flexibility. And we've introduced what we call a Christmas button, which allows us to keep a promise to a customer saying that it will be delivered within a set window of time for their recipient. Because no one wants to get mince pies and Christmas puddings in November. And likewise, what we don't want to do is be delivering anything after the special day itself. So for me, the delivery options as part of service are absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we move on to number 2, inaccurate forecasting. this is all the steps, the rigor around working out what you're going to need in terms of carrier capacity, what services you need, how much, when, etc. We work very closely with our customers and start this process in September. And I think this is even more vital this year, because what we're expecting to see is that carriers are going to be locking down their capacity plans. If they haven't already done it, they're going to be doing it soon. And once you put in those plans, there's going to be very little room to get extra capacity if you need it. And of course, if you're not going to use capacity, then you're likely to, you could potentially be penalized for it. So making sure that you put the effort in to forecast, get your forecasts as tight as possible is absolutely vital, so that you can be confident you've got the capacity you're going to need. And again, if you think about last year, one of the biggest challenges with carriers or with retailers, let's say, was retailers who hadn't forecasted, had under forecast, and then finding that they couldn't, there was no extra capacity in the market for them to be able to service those customers. So doing your forecasting early enough and solidly enough is really important. So Patrick, I know that we sort of work with you on forecasting, but I'm not sort of involved in that. What's your experience of forecasting, and what have you been doing this year?
Thanks, Bobby. Well, we've been getting it wrong, same as we do every year, because the one thing you can be sure of is no matter how much effort you put into it, it's always wrong. I think that there's probably several elements. I mean, forecasts are based on assumptions, so testing how realistic your assumptions are is critical. Our forecasting for our wicker baskets has to start in February, because we then need to bring them in from China. They have to be made and they have to be shipped, etc. So we start very early. And so being able to be realistic about all of the key assumptions that go into the forecast are very important. I think as well as having realistic underlying assumptions behind the forecast, it's also very important to produce scenario analysis. So you flex the forecast to be able to say what happens if. For example, if we have a large corporate client ring up and say, could we have 5,000 of these hampers for our employees? That can be a problem, because that's an awful lot of hampers to be able to go to a lot of people, especially if you've only forecast 6,000 for the whole of your season, and that has to cover all of your online customers and your offline customers. So in terms of lumpiness of our business, and in terms of the different elements of our business being both online and offline, it's essential that we work with you at GFS to be able to say, in this peak period, it could be here, it could be here, it could be here. And you help us actually define what our strategy is for the year. So last year, we went fairly big, fairly early. So that was the strategic sort of overview of what we're doing. This year, we're probably not going so early. Simply because we feel as if there might be some more corporates that are saying, actually, we'll put our spend behind our Christmas party and maybe not give as many employee gifts this year. So the corporate dispatches might be pulled back a bit. They tend to be earlier in the season. So we would find that probably we think it's going to be a bit later and a bit bigger. So compared to last year, we're probably going with a plan this year, which is a bit later and a bit bigger. And this is one of the few areas of our business where I allow our team to be really optimistic. Because if we're going to hit those targets that we want for the whole year, you getting those carrier slots for us an absolute critical element to success. And if we undercook it, and we're sat here saying, we could have done this, we should have done this, and we didn't do it because we didn't get this bit right, I'd be furious. But since we've been working together, we've learned how to develop a plan, develop a strategy, and then to build in the appropriate level of flex into that plan by having different scenarios.
And that's really vital, because I think one of the things that's characteristic of the last 2 years is the level of uncertainty and unknowns that, can hit us. There's still the question of, will consumers go out to the are consumers going to go out to the high street shop, or are they going to, will there be another lockdown, in which case online sales could go through the roof like they did last time. And to Patrick's point, I think you do forecast, make it as rigid as as robust as you can, but you need to be planning for those what if scenarios. And of course, you need to make sure that you've got that room to flex, you've got that agility, and that once you're in peak, you are speaking with your carrier partners on a day-to-day basis, on a daily basis, because to make sure that your delivery capacity plans are in step with what's actually happening on the warehouse floor. Okay, so that's number 2, accurate, where businesses don't take the time to forecast early enough, or to forecast as in a robust way. And then the third one is the one that you mentioned, Patrick. It's that reliability on a single, relying on a single carrier. So the story you started on, that sort of says it all, which is, first of all, the way we see it is that it's not logical to rely on a single carrier, because from a customer perspective, customers want choice. And our premise has always been that you have to offer your customers the widest choice of delivery options and convenience, because that's what's going to help them buy from you and come back and buy from you again as a loyal customer. And the reality is that you need to have a multi-carrier approach, because no single carrier can offer every single service that you may want to offer to your customer. But also there's the commercial risk of doing that, which you articulated so well in your story. So don't put all your eggs in one basket, as my grandmother would say. I don't know if you have anything further to say on that point, Patrick.
Thanks, Bobby. Yeah, been there, done that. Don't do it. A couple of other points that I think from a retailer's perspective, if I may, invariably most people will find themselves being in a David and Goliath situation here, in that a lot of the carriers are very, very big. And one of the things about big is it can be difficult to get hold of someone, difficult to talk to someone, and very difficult to get your voice heard. If you're one of lots and lots and lots of small retailers down here, and you've got a big carrier up here, if you do rely on one carrier, you will find how quickly the big boys are deaf. However, one of the things I would say that is a real positive about our partnership, Bobby, is the fact that you can bang the table and get heard because you have critical mass. You're important to the carriers. So communication would be another point that I would make about reliance on one carrier. And then a second one, because profit does matter to me, is the fact that you don't know whether you're getting a good deal. And when you have one relationship with one carrier, it's difficult to be able to go out there and get a direct comparison to know that you're getting the best value price for the service that you're wanting. And one of the advantages that you can commercially offer is you're constantly talking to all of those carriers, so you know where those price points are in the market to actually say whether or not we're getting value. And I think that the final point about one carrier for me is that you don't tend to be educated very well by that one carrier, because if they are exploiting you in a way, and especially a way that benefits them but doesn't benefit you, they never, ever, ever come and educate you and say, this is what you could do differently, this is how you could do better, because it's not in their interest to do so. And what we found by having a multi-carrier approach is that we've learned an awful lot about the market, just in terms of how we should approach it commercially, let alone from actually the inner deep workings that you deal with at GFS. So those points are a little bit more from a retailer's perspective rather than just from the actual nuts and bolts reliance on one carrier.
Absolutely. And of course, when you're in the thick of peak, you don't want to be, caught out if things can happen. Bad weather, adverse conditions, issues in the network. You don't want to be the business that's got, where you've got parcels piled up on the floor in the warehouse and nobody there to collect them. The whole idea of working across multiple carriers is that you've got that contingency. You can switch loads onto different carriers so that you can meet that customer promise, like you said, Patrick. So let's go on to the fourth one, which really goes hand in hand with forecasting. Like you said, Patrick, you can never get it right, and nobody has a crystal ball, know what's going to happen. So you always have to have a plan B, your contingency plan. And this is where retailers, we've seen businesses get caught out quite often because they may have amazing plans, but they haven't done those what if scenarios, and they don't have that flexibility to be able to adapt when something happens and fall back on a plan B. So in our mind, really it's so vital to make sure that just as you have your forecasts, you also are clear on what your plan B is if you need to revert to that.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with this, Bobby. I've been in a situation where being able to think on your feet, being dynamic, and having the backup plan, becomes absolutely critical to your operations. And when you're a relatively small business, you don't have the luxury of being able to play war games and rehearse for everything that can go wrong. So you can plan for a contingency, but you only really know what to do when it happens in the thick of the battle. So something that we haven't talked about yet, which is important to me and important to my company about the partnership with GFS, just a very brief one. Label printing. Oh, a joy of joys for me in terms of being able to get it right. But we used to have part of our label had a little bit of red ink on it. And that little bit of red ink, we didn't know that once our printers had run about 8,000 labels in a day, which we don't do out of season, that little bit of red ink would become really quite sticky. And in fact, it had stopped the printers from working. And that's difficult. If you've got 20,000 units you've got to dispatch, and those printers are going, and they all start to get all stuck up with the red ink that you've got stuck on the printer. Oh, nightmare. So one of the things that we were able to talk about and plan for as a result of our partnership with GFS was being able to talk to your tech team and your technology team being able to help us. You'd have never got that if we'd had a one carrier solution. There's no way that you have that depth of knowledge and service that you could ever get. But we developed a contingency plan which enabled us to look at alternative label designs and have alternative print solutions that we could just take a printer, move it out, put another one in, and still deliver on the labeling, which meant that we could actually get the units dispatched and out to you to the network. So it's focus on that micro detail of being able to say what's the weakest link or what are the weaker links, and know that you have in your partner someone who can actually help you if they go wrong. And you just can't rehearse for everything when you're in a small company. But if you have a bunch of people who are working with you and are on your side rather than being on their side, as we do with you and your colleagues at GFS, we can pick up the phone and talk to you even when it's really busy and say, okay, we've got to do this because we can't do that. And that's incredibly useful, just to be able to have that flexibility that comes out of having talked through what the contingencies are.
That's really good, Patrick. Thanks for bringing the subject up of labels, because of course it's not just about having the collections for when those parcels have been picked and labelled and dispatched. They've got to be labelled first. And of course, you do have to look at every point in that chain to make sure that you do have your operations are running as efficiently as possible, and B, if something does go wrong at any point along that chain, that what you have your plan B for it. I mean, fundamentally, you've got to feel confident that you're working with partners that are going to have your back when things go wrong. And then the final thing is not communicating to customers. Nobody is perfect. Customers, the consumers that are waiting for parcels to arrive, one thing that is very clear is that in their minds, it's very important to manage their expectations. So even once the parcel has been dispatched, being able to provide them with regular notifications and communication about where their parcel is at any point in the journey is really vital, because they want to have the confidence of knowing where their parcel is and when it's going to get to them. Even if a parcel is going to be late, what's more important to them is that they're told about it. If there's going to be any risk of failure, it's important that consumers are notified so that their expectations are managed. A few years ago, we conducted a very in-depth piece of research with IMRG across consumers in the UK. And one thing that was absolutely clear from the research that we did was that in a customer's eyes, a failed delivery is not a parcel that doesn't turn up. A failed delivery is a parcel that doesn't turn up when they expected it to, because they weren't told about it. So customers are tolerant when things go wrong, provided you tell them about it. So make sure that you've got your communications set up, that you are offering services with regular notifications, and that even your marketing departments have got comms set up ready to go, again, in different scenarios.
Yeah, I never mind if a parcel's going to arrive late. Mostly, I just want to know which day it is, and if possible, on the day of delivery, what time of day it might be. But most things, if something's turning up, I had a pallet delivery last week, and it was 4 days later than promised. But they kept communicating with me and let me know what day their pallet run was, and the fact that it was 4 days later than I expected when I ordered it didn't really matter. What I wanted to know is what day is it going to turn up, because that's quite a large delivery to have to handle. But
Precisely,
we've looked at an awful lot, Patrick. In your experience of having gone through everything from a courier going bust in Q4 to label printers not working, which is the last thing I'd expect as a problem, what would you say are the kind of top 3 delivery pitfalls to avoid out of all of these? What matters to your customers, and why does it matter so much?
Thanks, Chris. So my top 3, I've got to go back to delivery options as my number 1, because if you get it right at the start, it's much easier than then worrying about what happens as you go to the end and when you're having to communicate about what's gone wrong. So if you can make sure before you start the relationship or the transaction with your customer, you are making sure that you're communicating correctly with them to start with in terms of the options. That's got to be the right point. And in the gifting world, we're always seeking to be able to establish that emotional connection, because you're giving that product to someone via our service because it means something to you. You care about them. You either love them, or you're saying thank you or Merry Christmas, whatever it is. And you want that connection to go right the way through. That's how we hope we're able to establish repeat customers. So making sure you get the delivery options right at the start for the service element would be my number 1. I think from a business perspective, I think the forecasting point is then the most important one, because if you don't get that right, you let so many customers down collectively. So it's not that one customer, or that it's so many customers that you can let them down. And I think finally, the contingency plan one would be the next one for me. But for mine is always about people. I tend to say that finance is the fuel, but people make the difference. We don't have in my small company die-hard people that have got decades experience in the logistics world. But what I've got is I've got a partner who has. And so I can turn around to that partner and say, I've never dealt with this. And someone somewhere in the team, they'll turn around and the GFS team will go, I remember back in 19, we did this or whatever it may be. Being able to have those mobile numbers of those people that have been there, got the T-shirt and done it in the logistics world, I would say would be a big solution, both to things like the contingency planning and many of the things that Bobby has actually said.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And we certainly saw a lot of that when FedEx and TNT had the little blip, that people who literally relied on one courier, they had no one they could call and no contingency plans. They just relied on that courier. And for those that did, it was still okay. So we can get another carrier in, but how do we relabel everything and cancel the labels as efficiently as possible? And Bobby, what do you see from your side on the delivery pitfalls? What's the worst you've seen, and how can people avoid it happening to them?
I think everything that we've just talked about, to be honest with you, Chris, I don't think there's ever any one single thing, because they're all sort of interlinked. I think, but really the root cause has got to be from being reliable, having a single point of failure, just being reliable on relying on one carrier. That's not good for business, and it's not good ultimately for the customer experience. And if you can sort of, a lot of businesses say, a lot of retailers say, well, actually, yes, we're multi-carrier. We work with more than 3 or 4 carriers, which is fine, but the way they do it is not efficient, because what they have is multiple relationships with multiple carriers, which really doesn't reduce the complexity in the business. It dilutes their budget. And again, they're only getting a partial view of the market from each of those carriers. They're not getting the breadth of services or the breadth of visibility across what's available in the market. So for me, I think the number one pitfall would be thinking that you've got a multi-carrier strategy, but actually what you've got is working with multiple carriers, which is not what we think of as a multi-carrier strategy.
So having a solution that ties them all together, that really does work as a single entity. From the retailer's point of view, they've got one console to deal with, and then the parcels split out to multi-carriers, rather than saying, okay, I've got a parcel force contract, a DPD contract, a FedEx contract. I can use whichever one of the 3 I want.
Yeah, and of course, like Patrick said at the beginning, you've got that impartial advice, because that single partner of yours is working across all the carriers, and you're going to get impartial advice. You're going to get that consultative approach, because this carrier is going to have, access to all those services at competitive prices for you. So it's really around getting the right mix of delivery services together to address what your business needs and what your customer needs.
So I think there's a lot of nervousness and cautious, mostly cautious optimism, I think, about what peak's going to be like. But putting your magic hats on, when it comes to January and we're looking back, what do you think we're going to be talking about? Is it going to be supply chain issues, Patrick? Is it going to be how you couldn't get food in, or how you trying to get the next set of hampers from China, or simply the cost of getting the hampers from China, where the cost of a container has gone up from sort of a couple of $1,000s to $20,000? What do you think we'll be reflecting on in January and looking back, and also in January looking forward for the rest of the year?
Thanks, Chris. Well, I hope we'll look back, and I'll hope we'll all say, well, that went well, didn't it? However, I'm not so sure that there'll definitely be something that we'll look back and say, we just didn't think of that. Given the mild weather, we're wondering whether we need ice packs in December. So there'll definitely be something that we just didn't think of. I think for us in the food industry, there's a couple of things. There's certainly labour shortages are leading to supply chain problems, and this isn't that people aren't trying hard. This is just that they have been dealt an incredibly difficult hand. And if you're baking products or cakes and biscuits, etc., or making chocolate, these aren't things that you can do months and months and months in advance. And so those industries, those companies are really trying their very, very best. But the conditions that they're having to work against are tough. So we'll be saying that we need to build in more flexibility to be able to accommodate supply chain shocks. That'll be something that I'm sure we'll be saying, that we've got to change our business models to accommodate that. I think we'll also probably look back and say, right, this is a permanent dose of inflation. I'm not a signatory to the transient sort of view. I'm seeing much higher levels of inflation in both wage inflation, commodity price inflation, packaging inflation, and even down to sort of property rental prices. So I think we could be in for quite a sticky dose of inflation, and I don't think that'll be good for anybody. So I think we'll be looking back and saying, ouch, because margins will be eroded. Business will be questioning whether products are sustainable to offer. And I think that we have energy and transport costs only going in one direction. So I think we'll look back and say that there's some challenges for businesses to look for in the first quarter of next year to cope with inflation being a more permanent fixture in the economy. And I think we'll probably look back and go, there'll be a couple of times when we look back and we say, thank goodness we had Bobby and her colleagues there, because there'll be some sticky moments where punctures or ice or snow or fog just get in the way. And therefore we have to find a way around them. And it'll be the fact that it'll be down to great people doing their jobs to the best of their ability. And we'll look back and say, thank heavens we invested in a great team here at Hampers.com and a great partner in GFS.
And Bobby, what do you think we'll be saying?
I guess my concerns is not so much around the last mile, ensuring that our customers are going to be able to get parcels delivered to their loved ones, to their, to customers when they need it. I think my concern is further up the supply chain. Apart from the inflation issues that Patrick mentioned, I think there's so much disruption further up the supply chain that there's a lot to be addressed right now. And at the end of the day, if really it comes back to the consumer, what level of confidence are they going to have? How confident are they going to feel this year with inflation looming in the background, maybe even risk to jobs? Who knows? It comes down to, will the consumer is the consumer going to go out and shop? And when I say go out and shop, are they going to spend? I don't mean if they're going to shop online or in the stores. Are they going to spend? That's going to also impact what we're going to be saying when we look back next year on peak.
Well, unusually, when I ask people for predictions, they give me predictions and then they swan off into the distance, never to be heard from again. But I'm gonna hold you this time and invite you both back in January. We've got a date penciled in for the 26th of January to look at what actually happened in peak. So, Patrick, I believe you'll be joined by Hannah, your operations director, and Bobby. I'm expecting you to come back as well, and we'll take a look at what happened over Black Friday, over Christmas, and the lessons from peak and what we can look forward to for next year, and especially with the ongoing situation of everything from protesters on the M25 and blocking ports to container prices to just the carriers as well. So looking forward to that. And finally, we'll be sending out an email after this webinar, which will have a link to download the resources that you can see on this screen, and some tips and tricks to ensure that you are all set for peak. So Bobby and Patrick, I really want to thank you for your time today. Fascinating conversation, and I look forward to welcoming you both back in January to see how it all went.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure, and I want to wish everybody good luck over peak.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Bobby.